Hall of Fame Village Media and the Pro Football Hall of Fame present Football Heaven.
Did you think about these things and write them down, or these things that were kind of off the cuff as you were going through the highlights and working on the show? Or were you looking at players week by week and saying, oh, I can add this into my repertoire?
Well, that's a good question. I didn't sleep with the rosters. That's how rumors start.
Joe, once again, as we get ready to kick off another Football Heaven episode, this week we're talking about nicknames. And we got to start here in the Pro Football Hall of Fame's archive, where I'm surrounded by artifacts and documents related to some of the most iconic nicknames in pro football history. In this episode, we're going to talk about individuals like the Bus, the Tuna, Joe Cool, the Snake, some defenses like the Purple People Eaters or the New York Sack Exchange. But today I really want to kick this off with some artifacts related to some of these great nicknames in pro football.
Yeah, John, you might steal one of Chris Berman's lines right now, the king of nicknames, because you're back in the back of your archives there. You sound a little remote, but that's because you have to sit to get so many artifacts in front of you. But yeah, you had some great stuff there. Why don't you give us a little bit of a background as to some of the items that are sitting there in front of you?
Well, I think the two, to the right and left of my face here are really, Pro Football Hall of Fame related artifacts, Pro Football Hall of Famer related artifacts. We've got, Sweetness, Walter Payton, one of the greatest running backs in NFL history. We've got his iconic Kango headband from when he broke the NFL's all-time rushing record, and that's draped over a game ball from that game when he broke the rushing record against the New Orleans Saints. And then to my left, we've got Mean Joe Green, who, as you know, will tell you he's anything but mean. But Mean Joe Green, his shoes that he wore on that awful turf, in Three River Stadium. But, two nicknames there. You got Mean Joe Green playing on the Steel Curtain defense.
Really? Yeah, that's true. And, with so many of these guys, like Sweetness, you mentioned Walter Payton, you think about their nickname and you wonder, how on earth did you get a guy like Walter Payton gets a nice, loving type of name like Sweetness, and Joe Green gets Mean Joe Green? It's a real contrast. But obviously there's stories behind all of them, and we're going to get into it a little bit. Absolutely. Here we've got 1963 class member Bronco Nagurski's Hall of Fame ring. It's an interesting nickname considering his first name, many people probably don't know, was Bronislaw, right? I mean, your name was Bronislaw. I mean, first of all, it sounds like a fullback, but I imagine in school you'd probably rather be known as Bronco.
Right. And somebody here, this helmet from Calvin Johnson, somebody that changed the wide receiver position, how we look at it today in the modern era, these larger receivers. He was known as Megatron, right? And so that's his helmet from his career. And very interesting, some of the cleats that he wore actually had the Transformer logo on them throughout his career. So another great Hall of Fame player, another great nickname.
John, you use the name Megatron. That's so contemporary in the sense of our younger listeners would know what that is right away. Whereas when we start talking about some of these other guys that played in the years gone past, they might not catch even the Purple People Eaters. They're gonna wonder where the heck that came from. That's something akin to the '60s. So it is kind of fun. Not only are the nicknames interesting, but again, the different generations of nicknames make more sense to the appropriate generation.
Absolutely. Speaking of a more contemporary generation, the Madden football game, we had a special relationship with Coach Madden here, obviously, and we would always talk that there were three different generations that knew Coach Madden, and he would always tell you if somebody reached out and said, "Hey, Coach," they knew him from his coaching career. If they called him John Madden, they knew him from his broadcasting career, and if they just yelled out, "Hey, Madden," they were probably a younger kid that knew him from the video game. And right here we have the video game from 2015, the Madden 15 game that has Richard Sherman on the cover, he was part of the Legion of Boom defense.
You got a double Madden. You got a double nickname there.
Right. Absolutely. And then last but not least, we talk a lot about the greatest show on turf. One of the few nicknames of a group related to an offensive team, an offensive side of the ball. And here at the very bottom of your screen, you see Isaac Bruce, great Hall of Fame wide receiver from that greatest show on turf team. His locker title from Super Bowl 36, and then Coach Vermeil donated the game plan from the Super Bowl 36 game when the greatest show on turf defeated the Tennessee Titans in that epic last-second defensive stop, which is actually the defense that would hold on to win the game for the Rams as opposed to their high-powered offense.
Right. And it's interesting too. You mentioned Dick Vermeil with his coach's playbook. At the Hall of Fame, we think of an archive as a three-dimensional collection, but there's also our two-dimensional collection of documents and photographs, which that's a great representation of some of the or of one of the types of relevant two-dimensional archive materials we collect, coaches' playbooks and play sheets and so on.
Well, they're some of my favorite because you really get a different perspective of the academic aspect of the sport, right? And then you talked about the two-dimensional collection, and while over my shoulder we've talked at great length about in previous episodes about the Tom Brady draft card. Since 1997, we've received the draft card of every player drafted into the National Football League. One of those iconic one-name nicknames that exactly who we're talking about. This is Gronk's draft card from 2010, the second-round pick. So Rob Gronkowski, Gronk. What a fitting nickname.
Perfect. That's the contemporary Bronco.
Absolutely. So really looking forward to jumping into this episode of Nicknames with Chris Berman, and looking forward to getting into it.
Well, John, we can't possibly talk about nicknames without the master of nicknames, a gentleman who's been coming up with nicknames for, am I allowed to say that it's 4 decades? Or
it only hurts for a minute, Dee.
I feel like it's a point of pride, Chris Berman. Thank you so much for giving us some time, and hopefully you'll have a new nickname for Joe Horrigan by the time we're done.
Well, I've been working on it. I have some that I can't put on this webcast, but whatever. We'll do it behind closed doors.
Is that how that goes?
I've known Joe a long time.
I don't know what's more pressure when Brett. Who was the first one? It was George Brett who asked you to come up with a nickname for him, right?
Well, I had the short version because that's baseball, because we were on every night before you were born, so a few of them just spilled out. They date back to college days. You're on the air at 2:30 in the morning, which is 11:30 on the West Coast, but in Connecticut in the winter, it's snowing and you're on TV and you're a little giddy, A couple of them came out, etc. They worked. I wasn't trying to be, hey, I'm Chris Berman, this is going to be my calling card. It doesn't work. A couple of them came out. A few more that baseball season, like maybe 100 or 200 more. Now we're 82, again, before you were born. And I go to a big series. Football's on strike. That's the only reason I could be at this thing late September. And the Royals are playing the Angels, and they're battling for first place. There's a week to go. And I go to the batting cage, and, I'm young, and this and this. George Brett comes over and sticks his hand out. Chris, George Brett, like parentheses, no blank. I didn't say. And we all watched, blah, blah, blah. But we're a little annoyed at you. And what do you mean? He says, well, the Royals don't have as many nicknames as other teams. And now this is like a big game they're going to play. Again, it's not 1 minute before, it's batting practice, but it's okay. So, and he brings over Willie Wilson. He brings over Hal McRae, Frank White, a couple of the Royal. They all kind of gather around, not annoyed, but hey, we need nickname, whatever. And I said, well, George, you're already established. I can't call you Wonder Brett, or you're already George Brett. You know, he goes, well, what's yours? I said, well, I don't know. I got a few, but he goes, well, we'll have one for you after the game. Okay, fine. Now they play the game. He wins it naturally with a double in the bottom of the eighth. I think they win 6-5, 5-4, 7-6. Media around him in the locker room, comes out of the shower, mostly print. And I'm standing back. I'm not, hey, I'm big time. I'm nobody in 1982. He gets halfway through his first answer with all the local news. They got to get his soundbite and get it on the news, you know. And in the middle of his first answer, well, tell us about the pitch. Well, I went down. It was outside. I tried to drive it to left field, which we were able to do. He gets halfway through and he goes, there he is, Ethel Merman Berman. So I said, George Brett is thinking about this during a big game in which he just won. And this is what comes out of his mouth. And that particularly formed a lifelong friendship. So I've had others, but from George Brett, that's pretty good.
Okay, but when you rank that among the pantheon of your all-time favorite nicknames,
For me?
No, just in general, nicknames in general.
Oh, wow. I mean, baseball was really in the 80s more, and I was on every night. And frankly, what happened was there weren't a lot of the games weren't on TV on a Tuesday night, you know, Seattle at Kansas City, like, here's the score, 5-2. Make it entertaining. So we did. So baseball, the all-time best baseball would be, he's a Hall of Famer, Bert Beholm Blyleven. And the reason that's the best is not because it's mine, it had nothing to do with it, but every kid has heard it. Mm-hmm. Every parent said it. Yep. You don't have to know he's a pitcher. He pitches for the Pirates or the Twins or the various teams. You don't have to know that he's got a great curveball. You don't have to know that he won 280 whatever games. You just have to know Beholm Blyleven.
Let's switch to the NFL really quickly now, since obviously that's our favorite sport here, at least for the three of us. Do you remember what your first NFL nickname was? The first NFL nickname you bestowed.
You know what, Didi? That's a good, because baseball, I can tell you that it had to be one of two because I'd never done any of them before, and it was 3 a.m. and it came out. Football. So it's 87, which we would have, that was the first year of NFL primetime, which was, of course, an hour of extended highlights, and it was really wall-to-wall video. I don't know. I mean, let's see, 87. So let me think of some of the players that were playing at 80. Steve Bono, was he playing yet? That may not have been the first one, but some of them were singing nicknames like, yep. If you go back to past, you know, do, I got you, babe, Bono. And I'm trying to think, well, Andre Rison, was he in the league in 87? Probably not. Probably still.
Okay, let's do this then, Chris. Instead of making you stretch, can you remember the first player you gave a nickname to who was inducted into the Hall of Fame? Joe might know that.
Boy, that's even harder. That's, you know, I would say, Chris, that they got elected to the Hall of Fame partly because of their nickname. You know, well, you brought a lot of attention to guys. You know, when you started to mention Bad Moon Rison. You know, I mean, there were just these names that caught on. It became their name. You know, Neon Dion or Primetime. I mean, nobody said Primetime more than you. No. And it certainly put the spotlight on the guy. So yeah, you contributed in that way. But some of the great names, you know, Chris, you and I, we love history. They go way back, Aditi, and you know, and it's a kind of a thing that's kind of gone away. You know, athletes used to all have nicknames. You know, Babe Ruth. I mean, if you ask a kid today what was his first name, they wouldn't have a clue. I mean, you went by the Babe. And it's kind of the same way with a guy, Chris, you know. I love this kind of stuff, but Red Grange Red Grange had more nicknames than he had brothers and sisters. He was Red Grange. He was the Wheaton Iceman. He delivered ice in the off season during his high school and college years. And then the one, the Galloping Ghost. That one kind of came after in 1923 when Illinois, where Red Grange was the star and probably the best known athlete at the time, ran or scored 6 touchdowns when they played Michigan in the opening game of their new stadium. It led, and I'm going to read this, the legendary Grantland Rice to describe his athletic feats this way: a streak of fire, a breath of flame, eluding all who reach the clutch, a gray ghost thrown into the game that rival hands may never touch. I mean, that was the romanticism of nicknames and players back then that Grantland Rice is writing poetry about. So Grantland Rice to Chris Berman, we went from poetry to rock and roll references. So it's been a long trip, Chris, but it's been one that is now historic in nature, and you're the man.
Well, I shouldn't be in the same sense of Grantland Rice, but here's what I would say to add on for Aditi, and then we can go back. We have to remember that people didn't see any of these play. Yes, there were people that saw the Galloping Ghost, etc. But really, the baseball and the football in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and even 60s, I was reviving a lost art. It wasn't like I was any Renaissance man, but they were descriptive. Concrete Charlie, Chuck Bednarik was, my goodness, he was as tough, obviously a defensive or a linebacker, two-way player, but as you ever could see. Joe the Jet Perry was faster than most running back for the 49ers, and a gentleman, as Joe knows too. Slinging Sammy Paul was exactly that. His arm was better than anybody else that had ever seen at that time in the 30s and the 40s. So for the football and baseball too, they were descriptive. They were Gale Sayers, which is, of course, Joe, the 60s, right? The Kansas Comet. He went to Kansas. So because he ran like a comet, right? And so it was, if you had an illusion of what he looked like as a player because of these nicknames. Now, mine were more plays on the name, which is more sorts of fun, but never were ever intended to be negative. They really weren't. And aside, and it is a DD show, Joe, I don't care what you say, and we'll get back to it. So, but back to Bad Moon Rison, who probably was in college in the late 80s. He was, great pro in the early 90s. So Andre Bad Moon Rison. Now, the reason that's great, first of all, we've got to be friends. He was a heck of a player, receiver. But, if there was a bottle flying somewhere, it inadvertently would hit him, not literally, but you know what I mean. Yep. And I say that with love, not as a knock. So not only was it a song, it was kind of him. Or if you're trying to defend him, he was a Bad Moon Rison because he was a great receiver, Pro Bowler. Now, a few years later, I met him, and he had a tattoo. This is when tattoos were not, other than Samoan players at that time. You really didn't, military, naval. It wasn't prevalent, really, 90s in locker rooms. He had a moon, and he had Bad Moon on his bicep, which I assume he still does, tough to get those off. There is no way he ever heard of Creedence Clearwater Revival. There's no way. But he said, see? Oh my God.
I've got that record.
That's pretty cool, right?
That's very cool.
You know what, guys? I've got a great idea here. We'll play a quick game of lightning round. Chris, John, and Joe. And I'm just going to ask some questions. And the first thing that comes to mind, John, you're on the hot seat first. Who is the most aptly nicknamed Hall of Famer? Whose nickname just fits him perfectly?
Well, I think Chris mentioned Concrete Charlie. I mean, thinking about the way that he played the game on offense and defense, I mean, that's I may be taking an easy way out there, but off the top of my head, man, that's a good one.
Okay, Joe.
Oh, all right. The same question.
Of course.
Oh, okay. Well, the same question I'm going to answer, and it's going to be kind of a reversal. The most apt name, Mean Joe Green, is also the most unlikely one, because it really, when he got that nickname, it wasn't in reference to his behavior. It was in reference to the Mean Green Machine that his college football team was known for.
Of course, Broadway Joe Namath. I mean, if he happens to be my guy. I mean, I grew up at Shea Stadium, blah blah blah, and he was Broadway Joe. Is that better than Mean Joe Green or Concrete Charlie? I'm going to give a couple of obscure ones. Not obscure, but I wrote this down because I like it, but it would not be the answer, and then I'll get out. So Hugh McElhaney was a really good running back in the 50s and then later 60s. And this was a subtle one. Hurricane Hugh. It's like, I mean, it's again a little before my time, although he was finishing up when I remembered. But again, Slingin' Sammy, the Kansas Comet, and Joe's favorite nickname, who was not in the Hall of Fame. It's a Buffalo Bill, Joe. Right. Albert Golden Wheels DeBenyon.
Well, I know the newspaper man that gave him the moniker, and he shares my last name. So, there are so many great names out there, Chris, you bring it up, that aren't Hall of Famers that, that we, particularly, whatever your favorite team is, you've got them. But one that I think everybody recognizes, and I'm going to give you a little side story to it, but Deacon Jones. Everybody thinks that, his first name was David, but when he, wanted to make himself recognizable or make a mark for himself, he says, there's too many David Joneses around. I'm going to pick a name that nobody's ever had before. And he named himself Deacon Jones. Well, fast forward many years after he retired, he's here visiting the Hall of Fame. And I had to break the news to him. I said, Deacon, do you realize that there is another Deacon Jones who played football, pro football? And he said, oh, BS. And I said, no, for real. And I had to drag out the encyclopedia and show him there was a guy whose name was John Jones, who probably for the same reason chose the name Deacon. And he played in 1920 for the NFL's Detroit Heralds, and then in 1921 for the Akron Pros, both NFL franchises. So Deacon says, well, nobody will ever remember him no matter what his name is. So he was satisfied that he was sharing his name with a no-name Deacon Jones.
Maybe he was a preacher. You know what, Aditi? The Papa Bear George House is pretty good too in your category of what's a perfect nickname.
What's one that you wish that you had given Chris? What's one that you wish you had come up with?
One that exists, you mean?
Yes, like Sweetness or the Bus or the Refrigerator, or is there one out there that you're like, gosh, that's just such a great nickname?
Oh, wow. Getting to know the late Walt, I should come up with another one, but I got to know Walter, the late Walter Payton. He was a sweet guy. So again, that would go back to reason. That would be great. Of course, the Refrigerator, the Bears had, you could take anybody on that team. That goes back to the generation before us. They were descriptive. Although you wouldn't think a tough running back who had the all-time record, of course, would be sweet, like Mean Joe Green would be not mean.
Chris, I want to bring something up. You give nicknames to things that aren't even intended to be a nickname. In other words, you give a name to something else. And to my, as you know, favorite team, you have made something that has been said now for 2 decades. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. I mean, everybody knows it, but it, is I'm giving you credit. What other kind of saying have you created? Not a nickname, but a saying like that has lived on.
Well, for a team, I don't know that it's really my credit, although I'm giving it. Greatest show on turf. I think that was me, but I think so. I don't want to take credit where I might have read it somewhere, so someone will say, no, you stole it from an article in the Independence, Missouri paper, which is possible. I certainly made it famous. And this one, I guess, now that I think about it, Steve Sable told me this was mine. I in no way intended to be mine. I was only imitating John Facenda, obviously the voice of God in NFL films, and I mean, your hair stands up on your arms when you say John Facenda.
Right.
But by me saying, Joe, the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, he goes, Facenda never said that. I said, well, what do you mean? I he might have used the word tundra at some point, but he played back stuff for me, the frozen, the barren wasteland, or etc.
Yeah.
He said, Steve Sable, he said, frozen tundra is yours, Chris. Like, whoa. And I guess that stuck, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Well,
When you mentioned the greatest show on turf, Chris, that brought me to what I believe is a great disparity in incredible nicknames for defenses, but not so many for offenses. So maybe you'll tell us, Chris, which one's your favorite. Joe, you'll tell us which one was actually the best. And John, maybe you'll tell me of the best stuff are. And I'm thinking the Monsters of Midway, the New York Sack Exchange, the Purple People Eaters, a team that I grew up on, the Big Blue Wrecking Crew, the Steel Curtain. More recently, I covered Saxonville, which I kind of thought was really smart. The Killer Bees, right? The no-name defense. When you think of all of those great defenses, Joe, which was the actual best one?
Oh my! You forgot the Bermuda Triangle, but
Sorry. Keep going. I'm sure I forgot more. Keep going.
The Steel Curtain to me, it not only did it define the guys, but it truly lasted a long time. Like the Orange Crush was really a season or two. The Purple People Eaters was a long time, but not like the Steel Curtain, and it even still lives today. I mean, they'll make reference, of the new Steel Curtain or something, but I think that's the one to me that survived the test of time.
Chris, which one's your favorite? Which name?
I was going there. Joe took it, and you know why? Because it'll bring to this show, and it's a great. I gotta say, these are fun questions because these are my stock answers. Like, okay, if I'd had a little take home final, I'd have some great things for you. But part of the reason the Steel Curtain, I mean, look, we had the Doomsday Defense, we had the Fearsome Foursome with Deacon Jones and Merlin Olsen, etc. I mean, we could go on, and you're right. Not that many offenses, although, the K gun and stuff, but not even close. Right. Because all the Hall of Famers on that Steeler defense. I mean, that adds to, I mean, not that the Fearsome Foursome, for example, 2 of the 4 are Hall of Famers, or the Doomsday Defense, and here's Bob. So, but all of the Hall of Famers, and it was all 11. It wasn't just the front 4, which the Purple People Eaters were too, or the Sack Exchange, which is a very good one, and I saw them play a ton. The Monsters of the Midway kind of got, anytime the Bears played tough defense, it was really the 50s, right, Joe? Although when Dick Buck played, you expanded it to the 60s because it's a great nickname, but you really didn't. The Monsters of the Midway wasn't the nickname of those 85 Bears, although you heard it because that was team. So Steel Curtain, because they're just all the Hall of Famers and the lasting image of that team. And the Steeler fans all over America who have never been to Pittsburgh, I mean, not that they're the only team, obviously, but I'd say so.
Isn't that, and that goes back to what you were saying about how cool it is when a nickname stems from a place, like Iron Mike. Isn't Iron Mike because of the steel mills from where he was? Is that right? Iron Mike Ditka, Joe?
Yeah. It was part of his personality. Obviously, is tough as steel. But Iron Mike is because he's a Pittsburgh, the Western Pennsylvania guy, another guy that had that list, and it was the blue collar demeanor that he brought to the game too.
John, why do you think that is? Why aren't there more offenses with nicknames?
It's interesting. You got. I think Chris hit on it. It's usually groups as opposed to the entire offense, and that's where Greatest Show on Turf is so great. You have the Hogs, but that was the offensive line of Washington there. So, I think it's easier to maybe from a defensive side of things, a defense really is all about all 11 guys working together.
Yeah.
And so maybe, it's a little bit easier to say, this encompasses the entire group. I'll go back to the Purple People Eaters, and I just talked to Alan Page not too long ago, and Alan was like, I hated that nickname. He's like, I wasn't purple, I wasn't a people eater. Like, I don't know what that's all about. The Bengals have a quarterback right now that everybody's trying to figure out what's his nickname. Is it going back to Joe Cool and Joe Montana, or is it Joe Shiesty or?
That's so funny you say that. I was at a press conference where I asked him, what do you like best? Joe Cool, Joe Shiesty, Joe, and he's like, you could just call me Joe.
That is
the name his parents gave him, right? So
right. He probably, out of respect, you don't want to take. I mean, Joe Montana was Joe Montana, right? I mean, he was Joe Cool. That's who he was. I'm sure Joe Burrow is that type of guy. I've only met him a little bit, but you're not taking that.
That just made me think of another Pittsburgh bred one, Curtis, my favorite Martin.
Well, I mean, that's on my list of he loves it, although that goes back to a TV show definitely before you were born.
I've heard of it, right?
My favorite Martian, which dating ourselves, Ray Walston and Bill Bixby, he loved it though, because and some of the players like Marshall Faulk always enjoyed when I did Marshall. I mean, a lot of the guys really, even if it doesn't really fit them, they like it because it in the day when publicity wasn't like now, right? And of course, still TV. It's just not newspapers in the 30s or radio, but as long as the publicity is pretty good and people know who you are, most of those guys like it.
I loved your Natron means business. I mean,
that was a good one. And especially runner, I forgot about that one. Natron means business. He had to do it like when he was rolling over guys.
I just thought of one right now, just in the course of listening to Chris, and it's Chris back Berman.
It's all right, Joe. That's a
come on.
The best one I ever got, other than George Brett's, I was on a radio show like late 80s, and like their host asked their hostess, I don't remember now, what's your favorite nickname that you ever got that someone sent in? And then they had a caller call and go, how about Chris? I'll never be your beast of Berman. And I went, that's the Rolling Stones, hold all calls. We have a winner.
Well, to that point, how did Boomer come around?
Well, that was more coworkers in like a year or two in, John. Chuck Pagano, who went on to be our executive vice president of all things technical and just a great guy, but we all were working at 2:30 in the morning. He goes, boy, you're pretty loud on these highlights, We're going to call you, really boom them out. And I said, well, it's late. We're trying to keep people tuned in rather than snoozing. And we're going to call you the Boomer. And so it's not a Boomer Esiason, or David Wells was the Boomer. I mean, it wasn't anything birth or kicking and that sort of thing, but that's how that became. I'm going to go to one now. He haven't played much this year, but remember a couple of years ago, we do, and he's backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts, so you haven't seen much of him, Gardner Minshew, but that's a good one when he's back to pass, and I go miss you, and especially when he completes one after he's running around Fran Tarkenton like, and that's a good one. But we haven't seen him much. We have fun with
current one of yours that I really like, Chris. ABCD Lamb. I like that one.
Well, because it's a nursery rhyme, right?
And I am used to singing those right now. So yeah. But it's so clever in its simplicity.
Well,
what else would you put in front of CD Lamb? AB.
well, and sometimes you get to sing it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, C, D, lambda, scored a T, D, and that, I don't know if that puts your young ones to bed, but I put many people to sleep on my show.
The tuna is in the Hall of Fame. What's your all-time favorite coaching nickname?
Oh, well, because it's so not him. It's not him, but it hasn't stuck as in all over. But when he first coached, I'll say the name in a minute, just to keep the suspense. He was at Cleveland first before his fame at New England, so that's that. And he actually young in this, and Cleveland was on the West Coast, and they had these nice-looking orange sweaters. They were playing San Diego. Not knowing everything about Bill Belichick in 1991, I had met him, but not, understanding that he's really the hoodie and et cetera. I called him the Natalie-clad Bill Belichick, which by accident was such an oxymoron. I mean, it's just so. And so when I bring that out when it's ridiculous, well, if it's snowing, you make fun of nobody because you're wearing, Nanook, of the North. But when it's sometimes when he goes full bore Bill through the 20 plus years at New England, I always try. He likes it. The Natalie-clad Bill Belichick, when it's like one sleeve is cut here and one sleeve is below the elbow. And it's funny. I did an interview with him, years ago. I mean, 10, 12, 13. And we're really good friends, and I'm happy to say it. But I said, where do you, we were talking about, have you ever walked, I think the question was, have you ever walked into Neiman Marcus, and he starts laughing, and no, he goes, Old Navy is my Neiman Marcus, something like that, which for him was perfect because it's Navy also. But I think that's kind of how it went. But so the Natalie-clad Bill Belichick is almost a tongue-in-cheeker, isn't it? It turned out to be pretty good.
All right, before we wrap, we do want to ask you, all these years of helping with the induction at the Hall of Fame, you've obviously spent a ton of time in Canton. What's a great place to visit in Canton?
I sometimes just like to look at Jim Thorpe statue when I walk in. I mean, I haven't seen a bust yet. I haven't seen anything. And Joe will tell you the story of where it used to be. And when we did our tour of the hall in 1981, they opened my whole tour of it. It was a different place then, other than the Hall of Fame. I high-fived Jim Thorpe on the way up, the way in. I will say this, Aditi, and it's early in the morning. It's in the morning. But the parade that they have, and I've been in it a few times, and often I'm preparing for what I got to do. So if I went to the parade, it would be it'd be counterproductive for what we have to do. Especially last year, we were back to during the day. But I rode in it a few times. Once and my kids, they were younger then, rode with me. But I rode with Ralph Wilson when he went into the Hall of Fame, and Joe remembers this clearly. And for whatever reason, he had asked me to induct him, which I will take to my grave. I told him that at the time. I will take this to my grave that you asked. But I rode with Mr. Wilson, and who was he 90 when he was?
I think he was 91 when he was inducted. Yeah,
he was still sharp, Aditi, John. And just his comments. I mean, he rode, and I was kind of in the back seat, and he turned back and made comments. He goes, "Look at those folks that came out of." It wasn't so much a senior center, but as assisted living, and they were in their wheelchairs with breathing devices. He goes, "Look, they're fine. They came out to see this parade and look at that." And he then referenced it in his speech, by the way. So that would be the correct answer. The parade, because it's a parade, it's America. The chairs go out there the night before, but it's 6-year-olds waving a pennant and they're 90-year-olds on breathing devices. And if you can't tear up a little thinking about how pure that is and how the parades must have been in the 60s. I mean, I don't know the first year you had a parade, Joe, 70s, 60s. I don't know. I mean, if you can't enjoy that for what it is, it's as pure as it comes, and these are the greatest players of all time, and that's pretty cool.
Visit Canton and experience Hall of Famers' hometown favorites for yourself. Plan your trip to America's playing field. If you enjoyed today's episode, please check out the Hall's other exciting podcast, The Mission.
For more Football Heaven episodes and bonus content, please visit Hall of Fame Village Media and Pro Football Hall of Fame social media.